Gott zum Gruß.
Dear viewers, dear listeners, greetings in God and a warm welcome to our program for today. Today we want to tell you about another schooling given from the law of the love for God and neighbor, the essence of which we may present to you under the title The New Agriculture under the sign of the Messianic, Sophianic Isaiah land in the work of the deed of the love for God and neighbor. Probably you will be just as much surprised and amazed as we were when we heard the schooling, when you learn what revolutionary and groundbreaking principles in accordance with the all-law of love for God and neighbor will shape the new agriculture under the sign of the Messianic, Sophianic Isaiah land in the work of the deed of the love for God and neighbor, and how the people of the new era will grow into and be integrated into this new life on an earth that is cleansing itself. Listen now to excerpts from the schooling. The word Messianic stands for Christ and is the symbol for unity. The words Sophianic and Isaiah are symbolic for the work of the deed of the love for God and neighbor, also concerning all of nature, all animal species, all plant and tree species. The word unity says, among other things, like belongs to like. Like draws to like. Whether we speak of the species of plants and trees, or also of the animal world. This principle, like belongs to like, or like attracts like, is basically valid in all of being, in the whole all-law, which is God, the eternal, and thus also in the new agriculture in the work of the deed of the Messianic, Sophianic Isaiah land, where it is quite an extensive topic, that is, an important chapter.
Today's agriculture is often highly praised for its alleged efficiency. Huge factories produce gigantic amounts of artificial fertilizers and other chemical and mostly toxic substances, of course, especially for an increasingly industrialized agriculture. All that exists as artificial means is applied to the land, including enormous quantities of excrement, as long as it promises more yield and profit. Whether the life of the soil is damaged or completely destroyed and killed in the process is secondary. What is important is that the grain or vegetables sown are stimulated to germinate and grow as desired, and to produce as much as possible of what is desired, namely, as much as possible of the appropriately manipulated and highly bred varieties of grain or of heavily fertilized vegetables of various kinds. The billions of tons of artificial substances supplied by the huge corporations worldwide and applied by farmers and foresters include fertilizers of all kinds, as well as other substances such as stalk shorteners for grains, or so-called herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides, and other highly toxic substances with which people ruthlessly attack everything they call a pest, increasingly killing off the life in the fields, forests, and meadows, from beetles and other insects to the microorganisms and the millions of living organisms in the soil.
Humankind in this rut, in this routine, hardly knows anything else because people are increasingly being offered the same thing everywhere. Every major corporation is vigorously promoting its products for every intended purpose, for seeds and corresponding fertilizers and other chemical agricultural products. Regardless of what kind of field it is, of what kind of tree, or what kind of plant, as if one never had heard of the diverse life in the soil, of the thousandfold life on every square meter of arable land that produces healthy food. Instead, there are more and more mostly cleared, huge areas worldwide that have been sprayed to death. People talk about agricultural deserts as the source of the world's food. For how much longer? It cannot go on like this, and it will not go on like this. Because the change, the upheaval to the new era is indicated. Among other things, the radical change includes the entire nature, including agriculture, with all its cultivated areas, with the forests, the meadows, and fields. Much, very much, if not everything, will change. The global change is also indicated from the depths of the oceans. The origin of life always comes from within. From the depths of the earth, a new, finer material planet opens up, which clears away, that is, clears up everything that is marked by decay and still lying on it, the new, more light-filled planet. The new agriculture actively helps with this. It adjusts, in that the old era serves the new era merely by the fact that it is. This field, these square meters of land, have been acquired for the new era and are ready for the new agriculture.
For the cultivation and care of the soil and plants, the new agriculture and the work of the deed of the Christ of God proposes the following to the farmers. At the end of the old year or at the beginning of the new year, we can apply the following to the fields: the foliage of the trees in general, everything that the trees let fall, in addition to the withered leaves, for example, the many small and larger branches. We chop it all up and make a brew from it, immediately adding a little natural fertilizer such as primary rock flour and magnesium, and work the whole thing, as stated, into the fields in autumn or at the beginning of the new year, and then lightly go over it again with primary rock flour. In the same way, we can chop the leaves of the many trees and shrubs, mix them with primary rock flour and magnesium, make a brew of it, strain it, and add it to the irrigation water, and water the trees and shrubs in the hedges, as well as the trees and shrubs that stand alone. Then, when the time has come to sow the grain, we once again spread primary rock flour on the field. The sown grain should be well distributed. In addition, if possible, we add the same grains, that is, the same seeds, by hand, but only sparsely, which means we give only enough so that the information comes across there. Here it depends on the communication.
Watering should always be done carefully and cautiously. To do this, we can prepare the following. Immediately after sowing, in certain containers like barrels, we soak the grain, that is, the seeds from the respective field, in water, together with some primary rock flour, and let it stand. We strain this brew at the appropriate time and mix it with the irrigation water with which we water the corresponding field, if possible, always with a brew of the same kind as what was sown, because like always draws to like. This strengthens the growth and contributes to the fact that we harvest correspondingly strong grain. We can also make a brew from the freshly sprouted grain. For this purpose, the fresh green with the leaves is mown as long as ears have not formed on the stalks, and a brew is prepared until a good fertilizer slurry has formed. This is then strained and the brew is added to the irrigation water. Like wants to be with like. As we have heard, everything has consciousness. Everything has communication and information. Therefore, we are asked to always heed the law of attraction. Like wants to be with like.
This principle, like always wants its like, applies, as stated, to all spheres, including vegetable cultivation and to the different kinds of vegetables. Everything wants to be fertilized or watered according to its kind, with the information that corresponds to the respective kind. All the different kinds of vegetables also want this. For fertilizing or watering, we can do this by collecting the remains of the vegetables during harvest or when cleaning the vegetables, then chop them and make a brew from them, each separately, according to the kind of vegetable. Cabbage to cabbage, onions to onions, Hokkaido squash to Hokkaido squash, potatoes to potatoes, carrots to carrots, leeks to leeks, and so on. If it's not otherwise possible, then we can also mix what fits together. For example, root vegetables with root vegetables, above-ground vegetables with above-ground ones.
If one just considers how and with what the fields are fertilized and treated today, already before sowing, up to right before harvest, and then after harvest, how the life in the food is dealt with, then one can also easily conclude from this what people give to their body along with the so-called food as information and how it affects their behavior, and following this thought, how a whole nation which nourishes itself in such a way will behave toward another nation. Isn't it a chain of violence against nature and against the life, from sowing up to the so-called foodstuff? What do we eat then? What content, that is, information, do we take in with our food and drinks? And how does this information have a corresponding effect on our personal behavior and on the behavior of an entire people or nation? On the whole thing leads to chaos, the consequences of which are now coming to light in the climate change.
As already explained, the beginning of the new era has been indicated, in which the path with Christ leads into eternity via the kingdom of peace. People of the new era already have developed a certain measure of divine spiritual actualization, that is, fulfillment, of the divine principles of the law, and have thus raised their consciousness, which means that they enter the new era with inner knowledge in order to learn perception, through which the so-called aura of the human being gradually refines, because the all too human words and the person-related demeanor become less. Contention and quarreling are also refrained from. We will soon tire of much thinking and talking, because it is a part of the old time. Therefore, let us turn to perception. What does it mean to attain perception? Infinity radiates the primordial law of all primordial forces and tries to come into contact, that is, communication with our state of consciousness. Everything that lives has content. Everything has consciousness. Everything has contact to the same radiation of another consciousness. One would hardly believe that even every cell of our body has contact with the corresponding like radiation of another consciousness. This is true, for example, for fruits, grains, vegetables, and also for contact with the whole world of nature and animals, including with the minerals, with every stone. Water as well. Indeed, every drop of water, even all irrigation water, has content, has consciousness, is consciousness that communicates. People who follow the Christ path learn more and more perception to gain understanding. Through perception and understanding, the wayfarer on the Christ path will forget the many unessential words. The essential will attain significance.
Let's go back to the sphere that is addressed in the title of this program, the new agriculture under the sign of the Messianic, Sophianic Isaiah land, in the work of the deed of the love for God and neighbor. The grain grows and ripens and, as possible, is sprinkled with irrigation water of the same kind and, if possible, also watered. Let's remember, like desires like. In the process, the following can happen. During our activity, we stumble over a stone. Now perception is called for. What does the stone want to tell us, perhaps? Hey, you're not focused on your work. Look around. In fact, there are meadows and fields here. What do these fields want to reveal to us? As stated, perception is called for. If possible, we stop in front of a grain field and let our hand stroke through the grain stalks lightly and loosely. The wind moves the ears in even waves and sends us a message. We become calm and listen. But we're not yet totally with our task, that is, with ourselves, because we are waiting for an answer. That's wrong, because the one who waits, that is, expects, does not receive. Only those who gradually rejoice and let go of the grain in their hand and stay standing there without expecting anything will receive. Then the question is, do thoughts come that tell us to go on, or do we feel the grain field calmly and turned away from ourselves? If in our feelings or thoughts, then something completely impersonal comes up, as we say, something apparently insignificant, then we should note it down, because this can be the beginning of perception. We can experience the same in every field. It is equally true for every cultivated, that is, familiar crop, for fruit trees and others. For example, every grain field communicates to the one who has a positive contact with this life form, because everything has consciousness and wants to communicate accordingly. It seeks the like radiation of a corresponding consciousness.
People on the Christ path should learn perception in order to gradually understand life, the life form that radiates its consciousness. Then fewer and fewer words will be needed, whereby people will burden their aura with less and less that is coarse, dark, and emitting sparks. Perception means to experience, to perceive, that everything lives. Even all of nature is one word, which is called life. It has various, that is, different levels of consciousness, but everything that we see and do not yet see and hear is consciousness and sense. It even sends to us. We learn this perception very gradually. On many parts of this earth, we have the 4 seasons. We learn, for example, that each season has in itself a state of consciousness, in which there are innumerable aspects of perception that want to be perceived by us human beings. For nature sees us in unity with it, with nature, with everything that it radiates. We will realize very quickly that perception gradually leads to a change in our feeling and sensing, and above all, in our thoughts and words. We change our view of the world. Our previous thoughts and our words often become too heavy for us. They become more positive because we increasingly recognize the life in everyone and in everything. Also because our aura speaks up and calls for peace and harmony.
On the Christ path to the kingdom of peace, we learn that, on the one hand, infinity consists of collective units, on the other hand, of collective groups, whereby collective units can be certain types of stone or stony moss, all the way to rocks, even mountains and mountain slopes, which are held together by the soil. Mountains and mountain massifs are collective connections with corresponding layers of earth, but also with root systems, which in turn are part of another group combination and which are set as an all-unity in the developmental or evolutionary planes of being. Nothing, one can say nothing at all, is separate from the eternal law. Nature, seen as a whole, is collective connections or group units depending on size, for example, a forest or mixed forest, fir forest or pine forest. Everything has its place and its community and unity in the law of life. Everything that is listed here, and far more, that is, all the being of nature, is permeated by the eternal law, God.
Another example of this, which we can practice in autumn. In autumn, there are lots of dry leaves. Soon we will learn that there is nothing dried out. At most, it is dry. For example, a dry leaf that the tree has dropped in the fall. The question stands, is the leaf dried out or dry? Now we are asked. We take the leaf between our thumb and forefinger and try to rub it, if possible, without pressure. We gently glide over the leaf. We try not to think. We gently move the autumn leaf between our fingers. Without our wanting it, thoughts come. We do not repress our thoughts, but we note down the first impression. Now, another attempt. We rub the same autumn leaf between our forefinger and thumb again and try very hard not to let any thoughts come. But finally, we can't ward off our thoughts. We now allow these thoughts to come and write down what we just thought. When we go for a walk, or when we go shopping, or when we go to our vehicle, everything is connected with perception. We drive in the car or walk here and there. Everything is perception. But suddenly, we have become aware of something, possibly a stone or a leaf that is still green or something else. We were sent to. By what? By whom? If possible, we stay standing there and let ourselves be guided by our eyes. When we think they have now reached the sender, we try to turn off our thinking. Unless we are in conversation with fellow people, then the events of the day can also convey some things to us.
Thereby, we can realize the difference. People speak according to their daily events, which mostly consist of their personal programs. Nature, on the other hand, has no programs, but consciousness that sends. All of infinity is consciousness in sending and receiving. Only what goes out from the human being are programs that are emitted and have the corresponding sender and the corresponding receiver. Dear viewers, dear listeners, thus far, the aspects that we were privileged to present to you from the schooling of the spirit of love for God and neighbor. We notice already that in the new era, the respect for the life from God, the love for God and neighbor, again receives the importance it deserves. Under the principle of unity, people's treatment of nature, plants and animals in general, and, as we have seen, also in the care and cultivation of the soil, are raised to a completely different level. For this, also for us people, changing our way of thinking and above all, also learning and the expansion of consciousness are called for in order to be able to enter into communication with all life. Perception is called for. If you feel addressed by aspects of this schooling that you would like to try out on yourself, we wish you much success with this. We take our leave of you and say goodbye until next time with a warm greetings in God.